Welcome, everyone, to the State Department. Happy Tuesday. Just a few things at the top, and then I'll get to your questions. First of all, I did want to introduce, with World Press Freedom less than a week away, the department is launching its 5th annual Free the Press campaign. And beginning today and over the course of the next 6 days, we're going to highlight emblematic cases of reporters from around the world who are imprisoned, harassed, and otherwise targeted for doing their jobs just by reporting the news. To mark the 5th anniversary, the department will highlight journalists and media outlets that we have identified in previous years that were censored, attacked, threatened, imprisoned, or otherwise oppressed because of their reporting, whose situations have not yet improved. And we're going to spotlight these various cases in 3 ways. One, by raising them from behind the podium at the top of each daily press briefing. 2, by spotlighting them on www.humanrights.gov and social media. And then 3rd, by using the hashtag Free the Press to spread the word and message on Twitter. And the campaign's goal is straightforward. It's to call the world's attention to the plight of these reporters and to call on governments to protect and promote the right to call on governments to protect and promote the right to freedom of expression. For our first case for World Press Freedom Day, we'd like to highlight Jose Antonio Torres, who's a journalist for Grama, the official communist daily newspaper in Cuba. And he was arrested on February 2011 after Grama published his report on the mismanagement of a public works project in Santiago de Cuba, and subsequently sentenced to 14 years in prison for allegedly spying. This is the kind of reporting that promotes transparency and makes government accountable to its people. We take this opportunity to call on the government of Cuba to release him. You can learn more about his case and others involved in Free the Press on our website, again, www.humanrights.gov. I know John got the question yesterday. We did want to note and congratulate the people of Serbia on holding national, provincial, and local elections on April 24th. And the OSCE International Observer Mission and the U.S. Embassy observers assessed that the election day procedures were conducted in accordance with the law. Through this election, the Serbian people have expressed a clear support for Serbia's path toward further integration with Europe. So we look forward to continuing our close work with Prime Minister Aleksandar Vučić and his government on efforts to reach this goal, including justice reform, the normalization of relations with Kosovo, regional reconciliation, and on strengthening, of course, bilateral relations between the United States and Serbia. And then lastly, apologize for all this at the top, but one last item. It's on South Sudan. The return of Riek Machar to Juba and his swearing in as first vice president today represents an important step towards formation of a transitional government of national unity and a second chance to reclaim the promise that this young nation deserves. We welcome the statements by President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar calling for cooperation, reconciliation, and peaceful coexistence. South Sudan's leaders now need to complete formation of the transitional government, fully respect the permanent ceasefire agreement, facilitate humanitarian access to all areas of the country, and begin implementing the reform agenda of the peace agreement, according to the timeline established by the parties. We express our appreciation to Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, Chairperson President Festus Mogai, as the African Union, the United Nations mission in South Sudan, and the member states of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development for their efforts to support the implementation of the August Peace Agreement. Over to you, Brad.
I wanted to, I think we'll maybe get back to South Sudan, but I wanted to ask you about the reports out of Korea that the North is prepared for a 5th nuclear test. One, does this square up with your understanding of the activity in North Korea right now? 2, what is your message to the North as it considers undertaking this?
Well, first of all, obviously we're closely monitoring the situation on the ground on the Korean Peninsula, to be more specific, in coordination with our regional allies. I mean, in terms of President Park's specific comments, I would refer you to him and to the government of Korea. But specifically, you asked, what is our assessment? I mean, we have seen a pattern here over the past several weeks. I believe, just last week, on April 23rd, we had another missile launch or attempted missile launch by North Korea. So we take these kinds of threats or comments very seriously. We call on North Korea to refrain from actions that further destabilize the region and focus on what it needs to do, which is take concrete steps toward fulfilling its commitments and its obligations to denuclearize. The United States remains steadfast in its commitment to the security of the peninsula and to its allies, the defense of its allies, and we're going to continue to coordinate with Japan, with South Korea, and our other allies and partners.
What is the consequence that you're laying out for North Korea if they go ahead and do this?
Well, we did pass just a month or so ago really the most stringent set of sanctions that we've ever had in place before on North Korea. Obviously, which is always the case with sanctions, the real punch, if you will, comes with implementation and stringent implementation of those sanctions. And so we're working to, in fact, implement those to make sure that North Korea feels them, the regime in North Korea.
But you're going to do that anyways.
Exactly.
So
I don't
what's
have
the-
anything further to announce. I mean, you obviously saw last week we did, when the DPRK foreign minister was in New York, we restricted his movements right after the previous missile launch. That was partly out of an abundance of caution, given the circumstances of his trip. But we're going to look at other options as we move forward if North Korea continues with this kind of behavior. Yeah, sure, Michelle. Iraq is, yeah.
Do you have any comment on the last parliament endorsement for a partial cabinet reshuffle today and the demonstrations by the followers of Shahid cleric Muqtada Sadr?
Well, I'll start with the protests. And, we obviously, we support the Iraqi people's freedom of expression and assembly, just so long as these are peaceful protests. Peaceful protests are an integral part of a functioning democracy. And it is our understanding that up till now, these protests have been, in fact, peaceful. Moving forward, the security for the international zone is the government of Iraq's responsibility. So, they can probably answer best any further questions about security around these protests. But, we obviously support the Iraqi people's right to express themselves nonviolently. In terms of the cabinet reshuffle, I'd obviously refer you to the government of Iraq to comment on the specifics. But Secretary Kerry said, when he was in Baghdad just a few weeks ago, that it's important to have political stability, to have a unified and functioning government as rapidly as possible in order to move forward so that Iraq's efforts to combat and defeat ISIL are not affected and not interrupted. So, we urge all parties to work in tandem and work together to move the political process forward in ways that advance the interests and the aspirations of the Iraqi people and in accordance with the Iraqi constitution. Yeah, sure.
Not
Please, go
Iraq.
ahead.
No, I
Stay
wanted
on
to go
Iraq.
back to North Korea.
Is that, no, I don't know how that, we should, let's finish with Iraq and then I'll go back to North Korea for you. Thanks. Yeah, man.
About, thanks, Mark. Regarding Muqtada Sadr,
Yep.
is there any concern at this point in this building about his influence in Iraq? On multiple occasions in the last 3 months, he's been able to swiftly get well over 100,000 people into the streets of Baghdad. He's also overseeing one of the more influential and successful Shia militias in the country in the fight against the Islamic State. He seems to have reemerged as a major player there. I wonder if you can comment on that and whether that's a good thing or there are concerns here.
Well, I think just answering your last question first, I mean, it's a perfectly fine thing as long as, he wants to be a part of the political process and not work against it. I would just, you're certainly right that he is able to still wield tremendous influence within Iraq. That's clear by these current protests. And again, as we often say about these kinds of environments, is that if you're willing to quote unquote play by the rules and be a voice for positive change within a society, then that is part of the democratic process, and we support that. So certainly, we again recognize his influence. We recognize that he's still an influential figure in Iraq, but we just encourage that his influence remain, as I said, positive and peaceful.
Is there some indication that it's not at this point?
No, I just, look, just in the past, we've, had concerns, and going forward, I
We
think.
actually had a target on his head for a few years, and
Well-
he was indicted. I don't know if he was ever indicted.
I'm not sure about that either, but
But
all I'm saying
I mean,
is,
his forces at one time were at war with U.S. forces occupying Iraq.
correct.
I know that was a long time.
no, I
ago.
understand that. That's why, and partly, that's part of my caveat. I mean, that's why I say what I say, is that, I think as Iraq evolves politically, there is, as in many countries that are evolving politically, an opportunity for some of these individuals to transition, if you will. But we view always this transition with caution.
One more
Let-
Iraq.
Yeah, please, let's stay in Iraq.
There was some confrontation between the Shia militias and the Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga in Diyala. Do you have anything on that?
I don't. Well, I mean, a little bit. We don't have much details. We've been obviously watching it closely. There have been ongoing, I believe, skirmishes between Kurdish Peshmerga forces and these, as you said, the popular mobilization forces in the northern Iraq town of, forgive me, I'm going to mispronounce it, but Tuz Kurmatu. Both these forces have played important roles, frankly, in the fight against Daesh. When we view this kind of infighting, to put it that way, we view it with concern because, we obviously want to see the focus on the real enemy in Iraq, which is Daesh.
Thank you.
And Iraqi's forces, whether it's Peshmerga, whether it's popular mobilization forces, need to stay united.
Can we go back to North Korea?
We can go back to North Korea.
I just want to pick up on what you said earlier about the US will consider other options if North Korea does go ahead with
Yeah.
the next missile launch. What other options are you talking about? Were you specifically talking about the
Excuse me.
high altitude area defense
Well,
mechanism?
Thad, you're talking about. Look, those are ongoing consultations that we're having with the Republic of Korea. We're committed to the defense of the peninsula. I don't have anything particular to announce. We're always looking at, as I said, strengthening our sanctions. We did a big lift in that regard at the UN. But I think it's pretty clear that, as North Korea continues to make decisions that we believe are counterproductive, that we've got to also continue to look at what our options are in terms of response, and both, one, to ensure the security and safety of our allies and protect the peninsula, security of the peninsula, but also to make every effort to convince North Korea to come back to serious discussions about its program.
So you're talking about options other than sanctions when you said other options?
I don't want to, again, I don't want to get in front of any processes any discussions that we're having. I just don't have anything to announce at this point.
So
We're
you
always
are-
looking at.
So you are
Leslie,
considering options other than sanctions?
again, you talked about THAAD,
THAAD,
I don't want to, again, lean too far forward on this, just only to emphasize that our concerns here and our aim here is twofold. Again, how do we put additional pressure on North Korea to come back to the table, so to speak? And then secondly, how do we ensure that our allies are protected?
Can I go to Syria?
We can go to Syria. I'm happy to go to Syria. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. Sorry, David.
Last week, Deputy Secretary Blinken was just in Asia, and then he said in Tokyo, quote, "We are certainly looking at what additional steps could be taken in the event of further provocation from North Korea." including another nuclear test, unquote. So after he said that, we see another test from North Korea. Could you elaborate what other steps are you
Well,
considering?
again, I didn't elaborate in my answer to Leslie, because, and she was kind enough not to push me too hard on it. But I mean, no, I understand what the point is. I just, I mean, we don't want to announce anything before it's been fully formed and fully, vetted, except to say the fact that, we always are consulting with our allies and partners in the region and fellow members of the six-party talks about ways we can increase pressure on North Korea. There's a number of ways to do that. I mean, you all know the various means. One, obviously, are sanctions. One are increased security measures. But I don't have anything particular to announce at this point.
What else can be done? I mean, in your estimation, do you think China is losing its influence or leverage, or what else?
Well,
can be
that's,
done?
that's for the pundits to debate. We have been very clear in our discussions with China that they need to exert whatever influence they have on North Korea. They have, as you know, historically had a measure of influence on the regime in North Korea. To date, or recently, we have seen actions on the part of the North Korean regime that appear to indicate that that's, again, that it's under no one's influence, or that it's acting on its own accord. That's of concern, obviously, to us. It's of concern to China. It's of concern to other partners and allies in the region. So I think we're all looking at how do we convince North Korea through various means and methods that it needs to address seriously the international community's concerns about its nuclear program.
But Mark, it does sound like you keep repeating it and it keeps bringing up more questions because you're saying you don't want to announce anything before it's been fully vetted. So
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to. Yes.
There seems to be some plan that seems to be in an advanced stage.
I do not want to indicate that there's some kind of, we're about to, pull the curtain off of, a brand new plan or approach to North Korea. All I'm simply saying is that, when we talk to our allies and partners, when we look at the problem of North Korea, we're looking at different ways to approach it. Deputy Secretary Blinken spoke to this last week, as Nike noted. I don't have anything to announce, and it would be irresponsible for me to announce anything before it was. That's what I meant by fully vetted or fully.
Okay.
Syria then.
Well, let's go to Syria, and then I'll go back to Japan.
The president said at the weekend that the cessation of hostilities needed to be reinstated. Is there a cessation of hostilities today?
It's a very good question. I think, in all honesty, it has, we recognize that the cessation of hostilities has undergone a number of challenges in the past week or so, especially in and around Aleppo. That said, in other parts of the country, it does remain in place. And what I think we need to see moving forward is that, that the cessation needs to be reinvigorated and solidified. And that's going to be the focus in our discussions with the other members of the ISSG in the coming days, is to how can we work with the various parties on the ground, and Kirby spoke to this yesterday, to do just that, to get them to pull back, to get them to restrain themselves, and to get them to abide by the cessation of hostilities. But without doubt, it's been severely weakened over the last week or so, especially, as I said, in and around Aleppo.
So you consider that the cessation of hostilities is holding in some places but not in others?
I mean, it's our assessment, again, and I'm not,
At what point in the war have has every place in the country been under attack simultaneously? I don't understand the
Yeah,
notion that you can't attack every place at the
I
same
understand
time
what I-
simultaneously, so you can never have the cessation of hostilities broken ever.
No, that's-
by that definition.
No, and nor, Brad, have we ever said that this is a 100%, legitimate ceasefire. I think what we have said is that we saw, could credibly report that there was, a significant cessation of hostilities. I think we talked about 70% reduction in violence in the country. Again, you're right in the sense that you could never have, or we have not had, a full cessation of hostilities. We've never had that since this came into play. But with that 70% reduction, it allowed, Syrians to live more safely, and allowed humanitarian aid to get to some of these places that have been besieged. So, in all, it's been a good thing.
And
we want to see
now
it.
that the violence is back up, do you still consider this? I mean, what point? Does
No,
the
no.
cessation
But
of
my point
hostilities
is, I understand
have
I understand your question. I guess
for you
my
to consider it broken.
I guess my point to Dave was, we're just saying that it's not, it has not broken down all across the country. But that especially we have seen a degradation. I don't know how else to put it, in and around Aleppo, where there has been a sharp increase in violations and in fighting.
But you consider,
But I don't think we're ready to.
You
No, I don't
consider
think
it a
we're ready to
living- you
declare the
consider it a
cessation
living
dead.
agreement?
Yes.
if the opposition were to make any attacks, and actually it has made attacks,
We
you
would call
consider
on-
those violations.
We would, yes, and we would call on all sides to show restraint and to abide by the ceasefire, or the cessation, rather.
Aleppo has been is the city that the regime has chosen as its current target. It could choose another one.
It could, that we don't, or, we can hopefully see a return to restraint and as I said, an end to the violence. And, there's obviously, and we've talked about this before, it's up to the task force, and it's also up to the various parties, Russia namely, to exert whatever influence it has on the Syrian regime, just as it is on us and other members of the ISSG who have influence on the opposition, to ask them to abide by the ceasefire. Otherwise, it doesn't hold.
Given that Russia reportedly is involved in some of these attacks by providing air cover and launching airstrikes, who is investigating this reported ceasefire violation? Does that go to the task force of which Russia is co-chairing?
It still goes to the task force, but that task force is made up of all members of the ISSG. There is a process in place.
How do you, what's the process? with
I
Russia?
honestly
Do you
can't-
ask them to self-investigate themselves? Is that the
I
process?
would imagine that's not the case. I think, but again, I
I'm not
don't.
so sure.
Look, Brad, I don't have a window inside. What I understand it to be is that these allegations, credible allegations, are vetted among the various members of the ISSG, and then there's decided that, what action will be taken, okay?
Has the
Yep.
task force to date come up with any certified conclusions about violations and provided adequate response? Has it done anything, essentially? You've
Well,
talked about it a lot.
No, I
but
understand,
you mean-
and it's a fair question. In terms of whether it has publicly reported or given out a list of, it has not, is
Has
my
it done it
understanding.
privately?
It has, I believe, vetted these and then, again, approached the culpable parties, I guess, whether it's the regime or whether it's opposition forces. Again, we've seen the preponderance of these kind of violations on the part of the regime. But that said, what happens is then they are taken, they're go to these various parties and then they speak to them and try to get them to, again, abide by the cessation of hostilities. We talked about this. Look, this is what it is. I mean,
I just don't understand what the
you can
value of
decide
it is.
tomorrow that if you're a party to this cessation of hostilities, whether you're the regime or the opposition, you can decide tomorrow, the cessation be damned, we're going to begin fighting again. Then you clearly are not party to that cessation. It's a self-policing in that sense.
But it seems like they're doing that anyhow, but they're just not saying that. So
I understand your point.
You're left saying, well, we think you're abiding by it, except in the cases you're not.
I guess-
And we can't do anything.
I guess, Brad, how I would put it is, we're not ready to declare this thing dead. We believe it is outside of Aleppo, largely holding. We acknowledge that within Aleppo and around Aleppo that there have been multiple or ongoing instances or incidents that frankly cause us grave concern. That's why we're trying to coordinate with Russia. That's why we're trying to coordinate with other members of the ISSG, and that's why we're trying to convey to the parties involved that they need to back off. Please, sir.
I was looking to change topics, unless somebody wants to
Happily.
follow up on this.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Unless it's a difficult one, then I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, in Bangladesh, Kirby addressed
Oh, yeah.
a question yesterday
Yes.
about whether or not this was considered a terrorist attack or a hate crime,
Yeah.
or how you might want to characterize this. And today, an Al Qaeda affiliate
Yep.
apparently claimed responsibility for the attack. So, does that change your description or analysis of what occurred here?
Sure, Justin. So what we have seen is, as you note, a claim of responsibility by Ansar al-Islam, which does identify itself as an al-Qaeda affiliate in the Indian subcontinent. And it does state that its attack was motivated out of hatred and out of intolerance against these individuals because of their activism on LGBTI issues. And it was directed against the LGBTI community in Bangladesh. We don't have any reason to believe this was not the case. We don't obviously have any reason to confirm it absolutely at this point.
Okay. And then on something separate, the story in the Daily Caller about Secretary Kerry and wife Teresa Heinz and their offshore investments through Teresa's trust.
Yep.
And the allegation here essentially is that the Secretary is taking advantage of tax havens. I'm sure you've seen the story.
Sure,
So
I have seen the story.
what would you like to say about it?
Well, I
How
appreciate
would
you raising it because, and I like the way you framed it, because you noted that that he is not, nor has he ever been, a beneficiary of Heinz family and marital trusts. He doesn't have any offshore investments. He has no decision-making power over these trusts since they're entirely controlled by independent trustees. And I think that was completely misconveyed in the story, to be honest. You know, as I said, he is. I would just add that all of his finances, as you guys all know in this room, you know, he's not new to the political world or to the government. So all of his finances are a matter of public record. And he and his family have worked pretty diligently, I think, to ensure complete transparency in that regard.
And it's safe to assume that the trusts have paid all applicable taxes and are not evading taxes in these overseas investments.
That is correct. And again, it's you know, all of this stuff, as I said, he's been, I don't know how to say it more, you know, he's been thoroughly vetted as a public official, as an administration official, but also as a politician. And again, none of these, what the article refers to, none of them are his investments. They're all controlled by the Heinz family.
None of this, just to be clear, came as
Sure.
a surprise to the State Department or the White House.
No,
That
not at all.
Yeah,
Not at
nobody
all.
was alarmed by
categorically, not at all. Nobody's surprised by it, and only surprised by, as I said, kind of the misleading slant of the story.
And there's no suggestion here that anything here is immoral or
Or legal, no,
or
not at
illegal.
all. Yeah, please, in the back.
The mayor of Okinawa
Yeah.
was meeting with representatives here in this building today. Do you have a readout of that meeting?
I do. Well, I can confirm that he was here in the State Department today, and he met with the Office of Japanese Affairs Director, Joe Young. And in the meeting, we did express our gratitude to the people of Ginowan rather, apologize, as well as all of those on Okinawa for their contributions to the U.S.-Japan alliance and for the warm reception or greeting or friendship rather that they've extended to so many U.S. servicemen and women. We also underscored that both the U.S. and the Japanese governments remain committed to the relocation of the Marine Corps base Futenma to Camp Schwab on Honoko Bay, rather. Excuse me. Getting
Was
hoarse.
there a sense of urgency in terms of closing the Fatima facility that was discussed? I mean, because it's on hold now, given the court decision earlier this year, or the abiding by the.
I don't know if it's a sense of urgency. I mean, we obviously want to move forward with this project, and we're committed to moving forward with this project, and that remains, our position from even before the court ruling, and certainly now. We believe it's in the best interest of Japan, and we believe it's supported by the Japanese government. As to, frankly, the local politics, we respect the people of Okinawa. We respect the local government of Okinawa, but those are internal issues for the Japanese government. Please. Yeah, sure.
The mayors, ones also demanding to reduce the U.S. military base in Okinawa. So could you tell me what the Japan does to answer his request?
How did he answer his request about what? I apologize. I missed just the first part.
He requested the reduce the U.S. military burden in Okinawa.
In Okinawa.
Yeah. He also he also requested to our
That's my wife.
Stem should be returned as soon as possible. So.
You're talking about, right, whether there was specific discussion about downsizing? Is that what you're talking about, the military presence?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, frankly, that came up. I will check. Again, we're committed with maintaining good relations, obviously, with the local communities on Okinawa. And we certainly listen to them and listen to their concerns and try to address their concerns as best we can to mitigate the impact of our military presence. We've done things like aviation relocation, or the training rather, but relocated that, relocation of assets and to bases not on Okinawa, and the return of land and the commitment to early return of additional pieces of land. Those are all kind of steps that we've been taking along the way. I'm not sure anything specifically was put forward today. Please, sir, in the back.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Azeb Ali from Airby News TV. Sir, Pakistan has arrested a suspect, Abdul Rahmani, a member of Al-Qaeda, who allegedly assisted Ahmad Umar Sheikh in the killing of American journalist Daniel Pearl. So how much you appreciate this arrest, and will the United States ask Pakistan to hand over him to FBI?
You're talking about the arrest of one of the individuals involved in the death of
Sir, Daniel Pearl, the American
Oh, Daniel Pearl, yeah. You know what, I honestly, I apologize. It's the first time I'm hearing of that news. I mean, obviously, his murder was a terrible act. We condemn it and continue to condemn it as an act of terrorism. So certainly we would welcome any announcement that there was progress in this case in bringing the perpetrators to justice. I just need more specifics on what exactly happened and whether this was indeed they found or they've arrested the man who was guilty.
So as you just announced, the U.S. Department of State launched Free the Press campaign to mark the importance of free and independent media. So if we talk about Pakistan, the journalists continue to be targeted by radical groups, Islamist organizations, and few others. So how United States watching the situation regarding the free media in Pakistan?
Well, Pakistan obviously has a very free and independent and vital media. It's absolutely critical to covering culture, politics, and life in Pakistan. And certainly these individuals are under threat. We've seen this throughout the years by terrorist organizations and prevented from doing their work. We obviously watch very closely and make every effort to protect these individuals, and certainly would encourage the government of Pakistan to do likewise. But the fact is given the climate in some parts of Pakistan, in order to cover the story, and that speaks to, frankly, journalists around the world who take tremendous risk, just to cover the story, and who go beyond, where they can be safe in order to get the truth and report the facts to the people. And there are Pakistani journalists who do that. There are U.S. journalists who do that. There's journalists from every country around the world. That's something we take very seriously. We look at how to protect journalists better and in the field when they're in combat situations, but as I said, also in places where they're under threat from radicals or terrorism or extremists. we all need to do better, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to highlight some of these cases moving forward.
Sir, one last question about Afghanistan, please, if you allow me, sir. One last question.
One last question. All right.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, a couple of days ago, a delegation of Taliban from Qatar reached Islamabad to participate in the 5th round of peace talks, scheduled to be held in Pakistan somewhere. So it feels that despite Taliban deadly attacks, the international partners are yet not ready to give up their efforts for the peace process. So what are the new hopes or any new strategies for that?
You're talking about the
Afghan peace process, sir. The meeting is going to be held next week, I think. In
right.
Islamabad.
Our policy hasn't changed. We want to see an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned process. We welcome Pakistan's role, the positive role that Pakistan has played in trying to get these peace talks started. For us it is, and we believe, and I believe the others who are part of this believe the same thing, which is, if we can get a credible peace process going, talks going, that this is ultimately going to be the solution to Afghanistan's ongoing conflict. It's in the interest of everyone in the region to do that. So we would encourage these talks to move forward. Thus far it's been really the Taliban who lagged behind in leading the efforts for these or in participating in these talks. So we would encourage them. It's their decision. The ball is in their court, however you want to put it. But this is ultimately the way forward, we believe. Please.
In Pakistan, just one more quick follow-up. I wonder if you have anything to respond to Afghanistan president's remarks recently. He said that he's calling Pakistan to battle the Taliban rather than bring into the peace talks.
He called on the Taliban. I'm sorry.
He's calling on Pakistan to battle against Taliban rather than bring into the peace talk. Do you think such remarks is do you have any comments? Do you think it's a deviation?
So I have not seen his actual remarks, so I'm hesitant to react to them. We have also called on Pakistan to go after Taliban or terrorist groups that are using its soil to launch attacks on Afghanistan. That's been an ongoing conversation or dialogue or discussion that we've had with Pakistan, and we've tried to enable them to have the kind of capabilities that they can take the fight to these groups.
I got one about Afghanistan. What about the Afghan vice president who can't get a visa? What's up with that?
What's up with that?
Why can't he get a visa?
Sorry.
What is up with that?
Sorry.
Thank you.
It sounds like a. Anyway, sorry. All right. You're talking about the Vice President Dostum, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And his. First of all, I have to put out there that I cannot tell you what's up with that because visa records are confidential under U.S. law, so we can't comment on individual cases. That said, I understand that he did put out a statement or spoke to the media and said that he chose not to travel at this point, given the security situation in Afghanistan. So I'd refer you to him to talk about.
Is he welcome in the United States?
We work with him as needed. He is the Vice President of Afghanistan. We obviously work with him as needed in his official capacity as the democratically elected First Vice President of Afghanistan.
But is he welcome here?
Again, he is the Vice President of Afghanistan. We will certainly work with him in that capacity. I'll leave it there.
Can we turn to Libya?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I want to talk about the ship carrying oil. I know that John Kirby has reacted to it. I know he's basically said he's concerned about it, but have you specifically, has there specifically been a message put out that nobody should be buying this oil that is illegally shipped in the eyes of the US? And also, what can you say about the UAE's involvement in this, given that the company, I know it's an Indian flag tanker, but the company, it's ordered by a company called DSA Consultancy, which is registered in the UAE.
So, first of all, yes, so we do understand that Libya's permanent representative to the United Nations has expressed to to the UN Libya Sanctions Committee, the Government of National Accord's objections to an attempt to export Libyan oil illicitly via this, as you note, Indian-flagged vessel, the Distia Ameya. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I apologize. We're closely following the situation. We have engaged with our partners and allies in the region, and we certainly support the Government of National Accord and Libya's legitimate institutions. We are very concerned about purchases of Libyan oil that are outside of these legitimate channels. Now, your question talked about the UAE's role or possible role in that. I don't have any more clarity on that. If we get more clarity, I'm happy to speak to it. I just don't have any more details on that right now.
And then what is the possibility of somebody buying this oil?
Well, I mean,
or have you told? I mean, it's on its way to Malta.
That's correct.
Would you then
again,
expect that they
I'm
don't?
not, sure.
They don't allow the oil to get onto land with that?
So
or
I'm
get
unclear. I mean, this is obviously,
transferred?
this becomes UN Security Council and issue. I'm unclear what the next steps would be in terms of this illicit transportation of oil. We would, again, call on all those in the region to refrain from enabling this kind of activity. But I don't have details on what next steps might be in terms of stopping this or actually, anyway, boarding it or stopping its transfer of oil to another, to a buyer. I'll just get more, if I get more details, I'll let you know.
Do you have any idea, or is there any clarity yet, what the money from the purchases of this oil is going to be used for, or anything?
No,
Can I follow up on South Sudan as well?
of course.
You said earlier that that Machar is he's now the vice president, and that his return is an important step towards the formalization of a unity government. Do you? What gives you confidence that this actually is going to become a real thing, this unity government, given the long problems that this country
Sure.
has faced?
Well, I mean, I don't want to be over-optimistic about, as you note, this has been a difficult process, to put it mildly. I think, though, that we do see this as an important step. I mean, there was, as we saw over the last few days, he was prevented from returning at one point. So he has made it back to Juba, and he was sworn in. So that's a significant step forward, and we're obviously welcoming that step. But it's important now for the South Sudan's leaders to take additional steps, which is form the transitional government of national unity, to make progress on a core agenda of peace, of the peace agreement, according to the timeline that was established by this commission, the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission. So there's additional steps that need to be taken in the coming days. We're going to keep encouraging them to take those steps. We've also seen, we also have, as I noted in my statement at the top of the briefing, the African Union, the United States or United Nations mission in South Sudan, and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development are also on the ground and helping encourage the various parties to take these steps and to solidify today's progress.
What kind of response is the U.S.? I mean, as you know, there's a lot of famine in that area. The economy is in collapse. What kinds of steps is the U.S. going to take to try to help this government on its feet once it's formed, if it's formed?
Sure. I'm looking right now just in terms of what we've been able to do. I mean, we have obviously, we are the lead donor to South Sudan. We've provided almost $1.5 billion in emergency assistance since the conflict began, and clearly, as you noted, the humanitarian situation there remains dire, and so we're going to continue to work with them. Forming the transitional government is not going to be easy. but it is the best hope for the people of South Sudan achieving peace. We're going to work closely with them on the reforms, as I noted, in the first several months of this transition. We're going to review the security sector. They're going to lay the groundwork for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they're going to establish the parameters for a hybrid court in collaboration with the African Union, as well as increase accountability in terms of South Sudan's economic governance. So I guess you're asking how we're going to help, and we're going to help them take the kind of initial steps as much as we can, and as much as the other actors on the ground, the international actors on the ground, can help them take these kind of initial steps to solidify the transitional government in the economic sphere, in the political sphere, and certainly on the security sphere, and then obviously provide whatever we can in terms of immediate humanitarian assistance.
But obviously, you first want to see the unity government formed before anything else goes on.
Yeah,
Right?
of course, that's the first step. Increasing the transparency and accountability of South Sudan's economic governance.
Okay, but
Yeah.
you're not interested anymore in accountability for the people that were killed.
Well, I mean, it's always obviously, no one, I'm not trying to bury that or gloss that over. I mean, certainly,
But-
and it's in the long-term interest of the South Sudanese people to have that kind of understanding of reconciliation.
But there's no, you don't think there's no need for Machar or Kiir or anybody else who led all these forces that did all the killing
Well-
to see some sort of justice?
Well, no, I mean, I would look, part of, the peace agreement is this creation of a commission for truth, reconciliation, and healing. And that will look at the root causes of the conflict and lead a national effort at reconciliation. And I'm not trying to in any way diminish that. There's a lot of work or steps that need to be taken, as Leslie noted, before we get to that point.
May I ask
Hey, Andre. Hey.
a similar question in a different context, in the context of Ukraine?
Sure.
May 2nd marks the second anniversary of an atrocious event in modern history in Ukraine, where some peaceful protesters were driven into a administrative building and basically burned alive. 48 people lost their lives, hundreds were injured. The U.S. condemned the event. My question is, first, what has been done, if anything, to make sure that those responsible were brought to justice? And then the second question is about the commemoration this coming May 2, but that's the next question.
Okay, no worries. No, obviously, there is we are coming up on, as you note, the 2-year anniversary of the fire in Odessa that killed, I think, more than 40 people. And first of all, we can extend our condolences to the people of Ukraine on the second anniversary of this horrific event that, as you note, occurred on May 2nd, 2014. We did obviously condemn it strongly at the time. I believe Secretary Kerry condemned the violence and said that that includes the violence of anyone who lit a fire and caused the death of those 38 people or more in the building in Odessa, and that all of this violence, and I'm quoting Secretary Kerry, is unacceptable. And Russia, the United States, Ukrainians, Europeans, and the OSCE, all of us bear responsibility to do everything in our power to reduce the capacity of militants and extremists to carry out these kind of violent activities and terrorist activities. In terms of, as you note, we did call for a thorough investigation, as did other governments at the time, into those actions on Odessa. I would refer you and have to refer you, I can't speak on behalf of the Ukrainian government on how that investigation has proceeded and who ultimately has been found culpable for the actions in Odessa.
I'm afraid not much has happened about that, and my question was what, if anything, the U.S. could do to speed the process along, or maybe to bring it to a resolution that would be at least understandable to the victims, to the relatives
Well,
of the victims.
Sure, Andre. Well, in any case like this, as I said, it's it was a horrific event, and in any kind of event like this, there needs to be a resolution. There needs to be a closure, and so that's what an investigation and again bringing those who were carried out this act to justice would bring to the victims of the attack and the families of the victims of the attack. We'll continue to make that message or convey that message to the Ukrainian authorities, but I would refer you to them for more details on that investigation.
And then secondly, the coming up anniversary will be marked by people there who just remember those who they lost. But the opposite side, quote unquote, the people who do not want those commemorations are already threatening that they will disrupt the proceedings, they will physically prevent the events from happening. My question to you is is the U.S. government ready to do anything in its power to prevent another outburst of violence in Odessa on May 2nd? And what can you do? You have diplomatic presence there, right?
Odessa? No, we don't.
You don't? No consulate?
So. No, I don't believe so. I'll have to double check on that.
Okay.
But no, we don't. But that said, we do have, obviously, look, Andre, I mean, broadly speaking, over the past several years, we've had an ongoing partnership with law enforcement authorities in Ukraine, where we've done extensive training with them on how to handle, among other things, civil unrest. But look, the most important thing to stress here is that we would obviously support any commemoration of this event, but as with any commemoration, it needs to be done non-violently. And we would certainly condemn any threats in the run-up to these events or this commemoration, and call on all sides to show restraint. Please, in the back, last question.
If I may,
yes,
just
last question.
If I just wanted to end on this subject.
Yeah.
Are you aware that a group of human rights and anti-war activists are traveling there from the U.S. as well as from other countries?
I'm not aware.
Would you support such a mission?
I don't know anything about the group, Andre. I'd have to find out more details about who they are and what their intent is before I would comment on it. Yeah, let's make this the last question, guys.
Yeah. Today, Russian
10 or 12? Okay, good. Fair enough.
Today, Russian authority in Crimea declared the Medjlis of the Crimean Tatar people as an extremist organization and banned its activities. The Department of State previously paid attention to this issue, but there is no positive decision from the Russian side. What is your reaction now, and what specific steps are you going to do?
Apologies, you're talking about the ban on Crimean Tatars?
Medjlis.
Yeah, Medjlis, right, exactly. Well, we did put out a statement on April 21st. We called on the Russian Federation to reverse the Ministry of Justice's recent decision to designate the Medjlis, as you note, as an extremist organization, as well as a decision by de facto authorities in Crimea to suspend this democratic institution. We're obviously disturbed that by the reports banning the Medjlis Council, because frankly it removes what little representation and recourse that the Tatars have left under Russian occupation. The Tatars face oppression, they face repression, they face discrimination in Russian-occupied Crimea. Almost 10,000 of them have been forced to flee their homeland, and those who remain have been subjected to abuses, beatings, arbitrary detentions, etc. And these brutalities and human rights abuses must end. As to what next, you know that we have sanctions in place. We do not accept Russia's occupation of Crimea. Those sanctions will remain in place until Crimea ends its occupation of Crimea. What did I say? I apologize.
Crimea ends
I apologize.
its
Until Russia ends its occupation of Crimea. And we also reaffirm our support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Please, Matt.
Two brief ones on Iran and then,
sure.
another different subject. One, you may have seen that the Iranian Foreign Ministry summoned the Swiss ambassador to hear a complaint. You didn't go over this?
No, I didn't. No, you didn't.
I'm just wondering if you've heard back from the Swiss yet about what.
We have not. No, I was actually trying to monitor this before. We've obviously seen the media reports that they did summon him in, as you note, but we don't have any kind of readout yet. We can certainly try to share with what they conveyed, but I'm not sure how much I can
Right,
share.
okay. And then, I don't know if you saw this interview with Zarif that was published in the
Yeah.
New Yorker yesterday, but
Read a little bit of it.
In it, he said that he and Secretary Kerry are talking 2 to 3 times a day about implementation of the nuclear deal. Is that accurate?
I don't want to.
That's an
I
awful
don't
lot
want
of phone
to.
calls.
No, I don't want to.
I mean, the question was, what do you talk 2 to 3 times a week? And he said sometimes 2 to 3 times a day. Now, my understanding was that they did speak like 2 or 3 times a day during the whole incident with the sailors, but I don't. But
Correct.
the
I mean, there have
impression
been-
It's left though.
So,
the
yeah.
impression that he left though is that he and the secretary are talking on the phone sometimes 2 to 3 times a day on implementation of the Iran deal, and I just want to know if that's
No, I mean, as with any, there are certain points, as you note, with the sailors, and also, late last week when he was in New York, where they might have consulted. I don't know if it's ever been 2 to 3 times a day. Again, I'm not trying to
All right, I'd just be kind of
counter his
that seems like an awful
what he
lot. I
said,
mean,
but
maybe
no, I
it's
don't think.
necessary,
I
but
think
it
that's
seems like an awful lot.
maybe a bit of an embellishment, but
All right.
look, they're able to reach each other when they need to and talk.
And
Yes.
then the last one is, have you seen this statement from Judicial Watch about the emails? One email in particular that was that they just got a hold of, that you just
I did.
put
This
out.
is involving Secretary Clinton.
Correct.
Yeah, I did, and I'm sorry, we just found out about it before coming out here.
Okay, well, the specific
yeah,
question
please.
that I'd like to answer is
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
allegation is made that the State Department was hiding this email, or had
Yeah,
hidden this
I'm
email
aware of that allegation.
because it would have led to the discovery of former Secretary Clinton's private email server well before it became public. And I'm wanting to know, one, is if this is an allegation that you accept, that you think has substance to it, and secondly, how was it that this email was not turned over?
So to your first question, I would, without knowing all the details yet, because we just found out, be highly suspect that there's any truth to this allegation that we were trying to bury this or somehow hold it back, keep it from getting out because it would somehow lead to a discovery of
Right.
our private server.
The whole thing is highly
the
suspect.
second part of your question. I don't know and I was looking into what the delay was caused by. So let me get more facts and more details about that, and I'll share that with you.
Okay, it doesn't look like it was a delay. It looks like it was being held back.
Being held back, yeah, no, so let me get more details on what happened.
One absolutely last thing.
The State Department never released a single email during her 4 years that ever had her email address on it. So
Again,
there
let me get more
I-
details. I'm not,
I mean,
this
no,
was, yeah.
This is throughout the entire 4 years, not one email, ever.
During-
She had not one
during her
responsive
tenure.
email to any FOIA request that was responsive.
During her time at State Department, is what
During
you're
her
saying.
time
I'm
at
just
the
trying to
State Department.
specify, okay. Well, I mean, partly that she was a sitting Secretary of State at the time, so,
And so,
well, I mean, there
there's
are.
nothing in the FOIA procedures that says sitting Secretary of State's private emails are censored. That's not, it's not a FOIA category, I'm sorry.
But they might have been, I mean, given the subject matter. I don't know what the subject matter is. I mean, you're asking me to definitively answer a question that I don't.
But you,
If you can take a question.
I will, thanks.
Mark, may I ask one last thing?
Sure.
On Ukraine, I'm a rare guest. I'm glad to see you too. You look great.
Please, hurry up.
Mark,
Yeah.
Nuland and Surkov are
Yep.
supposed to be talking on Ukraine. Have they had a meeting lately? And if not, are they planning to have a meeting? Sure.
Nothing to announce on that front. Obviously, they have met in the past, but nothing new to announce on that, Andre. Thanks, man.
Okay, thank
Thanks, everybody.